He was born into a world where everything was polished, fast, and expensive. Ethan, the only son of one of the wealthiest men in New York, had never known the meaning of limits. His father owned a collection of luxury cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Ethan treated them as toys. Every month he crashed one, sometimes out of arrogance, sometimes just to feel something real. Behind the shiny gates of the family's mansion, people whispered that the boy was cursed, or simply broken. But one day, after wrecking a $1 million Aston Martin, his father didn't yell. He hired someone new, a woman named Maya, a housemaid from Harlem, quiet and unshakable. She wasn't like the others. She didn't fear Ethan's rage, nor did she bow to his wealth. She just cleaned and observed. And from that silence, something began to change inside him, though he didn't know it yet, because what Maya carried wasn't just a broom or a rag. She carried a story that would break Ethan's pride and rebuild his heart. At first, Ethan hated her presence. Every time Maya entered the garage, he'd throw a sarcastic smile and rev the engine of whichever car survived his last crash. "Careful, don't get oil on your uniform," he'd say, his voice dripping with entitlement. But Maya never reacted. She'd keep wiping the dust from the shattered headlights, humming softly, an old gospel tune that didn't belong in that cold, metallic place. That silence irritated him more than any lecture could. Days passed, and Ethan started noticing her rhythm, how she treated each car like a wounded creature instead of a ruined machine. She'd polish even the burned paint with care, whispering to herself as if praying. One afternoon, unable to resist, he asked, "Why do you even bother? They'll just end up in the junkyard like the rest." Maya looked up, eyes calm but piercing. "Because," she said softly, "someone has to clean what others choose to destroy." Those words hit him like a punch he couldn't dodge. For the first time, Ethan didn't have a comeback. He just stared, realizing that maybe he was the one who needed fixing. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. Someone has to clean what others choose to destroy. It echoed in his head like an engine refusing to turn off. The next morning, instead of speeding off, he stayed in the garage, pretending to check the tire pressure just to watch her work. Maya moved slowly, with intention. Every gesture had meaning. She never looked up unless he spoke first. It annoyed him at first, then intrigued him. One rainy afternoon, curiosity won. "Why are you still here?" he asked, leaning against a wrecked Porsche. "You could work in any rich house." "Why mine?" Maya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the dull light from the storm outside. "Because I've seen what money does when it grows without love," she said. "And I needed to see if that could change." He didn't understand, not yet. But something inside him stirred. Guilt, confusion, maybe admiration. For the first time, Ethan didn't want to destroy anything. He wanted to understand. That night, Ethan found Maya still working after everyone else had gone. The house was quiet, filled with the soft hum of rain against the windows. She was in the living room, folding his father's shirts with the same precision she used on the cars. "You don't have to stay this late," he said, walking in barefoot. She smiled faintly, not looking up. "I've worked late my whole life." "Silence helps me think," he sat down, curious. "Think about what?" Maya hesitated. Her hands stopped moving for the first time. "About my son," she whispered. Ethan froze. He hadn't known she had a child. She went on, her voice trembling. "He used to love cars, too. Said he'd fix them one day, but one night he took one that wasn't his. He never came back." The room fell silent. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Maya didn't cry. Her pain had already turned to something deeper, quieter. And in that moment, Ethan realized the woman he'd mocked carried a grief heavier than any wrecked engine he'd ever seen. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing in front of the same wrecked Porsche he had laughed at days earlier. Only this time he wasn't laughing. He ran his hand over the cracked windshield and thought of Maya's son, of how one impulsive decision had taken everything from her. For the first time, he saw his own reflection not as the heir of wealth, but as a boy who had never learned to value what couldn't be bought. When Maya walked in, she noticed the difference in his eyes. "You look like someone who's finally seeing," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Maybe for the first time. He picked up a rag and began wiping the hood beside her. She didn't stop him. For hours they worked in silence, side by side, the rich boy and the maid, united not by money or duty, but by something simple and human, the act of repairing what's broken. That afternoon, Ethan didn't start an engine. He sat on the garage floor, exhausted, and whispered, "I think I've been destroying things because I was empty." Maya looked at him with compassion. "Then start building," she said. "Not cars, yourself." Ethan's father, Richard, noticed the shift almost immediately. His son stopped attending parties, stopped showing off his cars, and spent long hours in the garage with the maid. Rumors began to circulate among the staff, and Richard's patience wore thin. One evening, he burst through the garage doors, his tailored suit soaked from the rain, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here, Ethan? Wasting your time with this?" he said, glancing at Maya like she didn't belong in his world. Ethan stood his ground. "I'm learning," he said. "From her." Richard laughed, the kind of laugh that cut deeper than anger. "From a maid? You've got access to the best schools, the best people, and you choose this?" Maya stayed silent, but her gaze didn't lower. She'd faced worse men than him. Ethan took a deep breath. "You always told me money fixes everything. But you never taught me how to fix myself." For a moment, Richard's face faltered. The arrogance cracked just enough to show fear. But pride rebuilt the mask quickly. "You sound just like your mother," he muttered before walking away. And for Ethan, that was the moment he knew the real wreckage in his life wasn't made of steel and fire. It was made of silence, inheritance, and the things his father refused to face. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion grew quieter. Ethan barely left the garage. Instead of partying, he studied blueprints, manuals, and old repair guides. Maya would bring him coffee and quietly sit nearby, watching him struggle to understand how to rebuild the engine he once destroyed. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about control, discipline, and redemption. Every bolt tightened felt like stitching a wound that had been open for years. One night, after nearly 48 hours without sleep, Ethan finally reconnected the final wire. When the engine roared to life, he didn't cheer. He just smiled faintly, exhausted, tears mixing with the grease on his face. Maya placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You fixed more than a car," she said softly. "You fixed the part of you that believed you couldn't," Ethan nodded. "I think I understand your son now," he whispered. "He didn't want to steal, he just wanted to feel alive." Maya smiled, her eyes glistening. "And now you do too, but without losing yourself." That night, for the first time in years, Ethan didn't dream of crashing. He dreamed of driving forward, not away. Richard entered the garage the next morning, expecting to find another wreck. Instead, he froze. The silver Aston Martin, once a twisted pile of metal, gleamed under the soft light. Ethan stood beside it, hands still dirty, eyes calm. "I rebuilt it," he said simply. Richard's lips parted, but no words came. The silence between father and son was heavy. Years of distance, anger, and unspoken grief condensed into a single moment. Finally, Richard spoke, his tone guarded. "You paid someone to do it?" Ethan shook his head. "No, Maya taught me how to start." The name hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He looked at the maid, standing quietly by the door. "You think fixing cars will make you a man?" Richard snapped. Ethan took a step forward. "No, but it made me human." The words lingered. For a brief second, something in Richard's expression softened, the ghost of understanding, maybe regret. But instead of responding, he just turned and walked away. Maya watched him leave, then turned to Ethan. "He's not ready yet," she said gently. Ethan nodded. Neither was I. A week later, the house fell into chaos. Richard collapsed in his office during a late-night call, the pressure and loneliness finally catching up to him. Ethan rushed him to the hospital, heart pounding with fear he hadn't felt since childhood. For hours he waited, pacing, remembering every argument, every cold look, every time he'd wished his father would just see him. When the doctor finally came out, the words were both a relief and a warning. "He's stable, but he needs to change his life." That night, Richard opened his eyes to find Ethan sitting at his bedside, not in designer clothes, but in the same worn jacket he used in the garage. "You shouldn't be here," Richard whispered. "You've got your own life." Ethan smiled sadly. "I do now." "Thanks to Maya." Richard's eyes clouded. "That woman, she reminds me of someone." Ethan hesitated, then told him everything about her son, the accident, the pain she carried. And for the first time, Richard's mask cracked. "Her son, he died driving one of my cars." The words left him trembling. The truth that Maya had known all along was finally out, and the silence that had chained them all was about to break. The next morning, Richard asked Ethan to bring Maya to the hospital. She hesitated when he told her, her hands trembling slightly as she tied her hair back. "He already knows," Ethan whispered. Maya's eyes filled with quiet pain. "Then he finally remembers," she said, and walked beside him in silence. When they entered the room, Richard struggled to sit up. He looked weaker, smaller, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every word he spoke. "Maya," he began, voice breaking. "I knew your boy. He wasn't a thief. He was helping one of my drivers. The car malfunctioned and—" his voice cracked. "I covered it up. I told the police it was stolen. I didn't want my company to take the blame." Tears slid down Maya's face, not of shock, but of confirmation. She had always known. "I cleaned your house for years," she said softly. "Not because I needed your money, but because I needed to see if guilt could turn into grace." Richard lowered his head. "I can't undo what I did." "No," she replied, "but you can live with the truth. That's harder and braver." The room went silent, filled only by the hum of hospital machines and the sound of a soul finally learning how to bend instead of break. Maya didn't return to the mansion after that day. She finished her last shift quietly, leaving her uniform folded on the kitchen counter. When Ethan came home and found it there, he knew she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just the faint smell of lavender she always left behind. He felt an ache in his chest, the kind that wasn't about loss, but gratitude. She had given him something no one else ever had: truth. Weeks later, Richard was discharged from the hospital. He walked slower, spoke softer, and for the first time joined Ethan in the garage. They didn't talk much. Words weren't needed. They rebuilt together. An old Mustang this time, rusty and forgotten, like both of them had once been. Months passed before they received a letter. It was from Maya. "People break things, but sometimes they rebuild hearts too," it read. Yours was one of them. Inside was a small photo, her son, smiling beside a car he'd once dreamed of fixing. Ethan placed the picture on the dashboard of the Mustang. Then he turned to his father and said, "Let's drive, Dad, for her." And as the engine started, the sound wasn't of power, it was of peace.